Hi there. My name is Jim Blair, and along with Monty Taylor, we are responsible for the core infrastructure for the Openstack project. A while back, Openstack decided that our trunks would be gated. So all of the commits that are destined for the main repository have to pass all of the unit tests before they'll actually get merged. This has actually been fairly well received by our developers, as knowing that trunk always works means that when you make a change and something in the testing system breaks, you know exactly where to look. It's probably related to the thing that you just did. And it's been pretty good immediate feedback for developers too in the process. Here's actually the gating jobs that we're currently running on our Jenkins. There's a few types of tests that we're interested in running mostly. There's unit tests, which are fairly easy to gate on. They're actually fairly easy to run. We generally expect developers to run these tests on their own machines when they're making changes. And they don't have a lot of, they don't need a lot of infrastructure behind them. You don't actually need to start up the product to run it or anything. Functional tests, a little more complicated. You might need to start up a server and ask it to go through its paces and actually do something. So you might be able to run that on your workstation, or you might need to start actually having some extra infrastructure to run it. And then integration tests. OpenStack is made up of a lot of components that all have to work together. And so occasionally we need to start them all up and make sure they really do work together. You can usually run this on virtual servers, but eventually we need to run this on real hardware, as OpenStack itself is a virtualization platform, and we need to test it as it's going to ultimately going to be run. So doing these integration tests on bare metal has actually been a focus for our work for a little while now. Our first attempt at this was we'll pixie boot a bunch of servers, we'll install Ubuntu on it, install OpenStack, and run our test suite. And this was pretty neat. This worked, but we actually realized that we ended up spending a lot of time testing things that we didn't necessarily need to test as part of our trunk gating process. We don't need to test that a particular set of servers can boot and install Ubuntu every time. Other people need to test that, but we don't need to run every OpenStack change through that whole process. So we've come up with an improved test process, and we use Orchestra for this. We pixie boot servers, install Ubuntu on them, install as many OpenStack dependencies as we can, and then we snapshot the machine state there. And what we're going with this is we're actually trying to make our bare metal hardware behave a little bit more like cloud servers, in that whenever we need to start testing an OpenStack change, we'll just have a computing resource ready to run that and ready to go. So once we've snapshot that LVM volume, we kexec boot into the machine. Kexec is a wonderful facility. It is to, kexec is to the kernel as exec is to a regular process. It immediately starts running a brand new kernel, completely discarding the system state. So that actually got our test reset time down from about 15 minutes to 3 seconds, which is something that we need to do if we're going to run all of the OpenStack changes through this process, as we'll be testing hundreds of patches a day. Monty is going to talk a little bit about the OpenStack projects that we have right now.
Yeah. So as this is a list right here of the if you can read. Oh, you can even. Yeah. Oh, there it goes. This is a list of the current core OpenStack projects, as seen in our Launchpad page, because that's where we are, and it sort of shows that Rick is still running things. So I don't know if you knew that you had that much power, Rick, still, but apparently you do. Anyway, we've got 6 core projects. There's a whole bunch more in incubation, and they kind of all have to work together. There's a lot of internal to those. There's a lot of additional variation. Nova, for instance, can work on a number of different hypervisors. There's different networking strategies that you can use. And so when you have this many different projects and this many different sub-configurations inside of the projects, you can imagine that quite quickly the multitude of things that one might need to test on any given commit trunk might grow quite significantly. Luckily for us, however, we also have lots of contributors. So we have many companies actually at the moment who are participating in OpenStack, and most of the different variations that we have in the different ways in which OpenStack can behave are in large part driven by the fact that we do have all of those different companies, and each of them have their own vested interests in running things like, say, Zen versus KVM. It's not just because we felt like doing things randomly multiple times. It's various people have different opinions on how that should work. And so one of the things that we've been working on as a way of dealing with all of the sort of multitude of options that we need to test is to leverage the multitude of contributors, contributing companies and people who have interest in doing things. So what we got to with that is what we're partially smirkingly calling testing as a service, because everything these days needs at least 2 A's and an S on the end of it to be cool. And the way this works is we've got a fairly common interface. Oh, and people are having fun out there. We've got a common interface in Jenkins, which is what's running all of this. We've got a fairly well-defined set of inputs, which are commits to all of the projects that we want to test. And the thing that we want to get out of that is test results. And that might seem like it's fairly simplistic, but at the end of the day, the nice part about it is that's actually sort of all we have to deal with here. So what we're doing is we're having each of the vendors or each of the contributing companies who has an interest in making sure that a particular thing works. For Cisco, for instance, it might be really important to them that the quantum networking layer can actually operate with Cisco switches. If it doesn't operate with Cisco switches, then Cisco is going to be sort of unhappy if they're trying to sell people on Cisco switches. But that's in their vested interest. I don't personally care. Like, I like them. I'm just saying it's not my job to make sure that their stuff works. But they can contribute hardware, and rather than them mailing me hardware, which I don't really have room for in my apartment, and my internet connection in my apartment isn't really good enough to run that anyway, nor is my air conditioning. What we've asked them to do is actually stand up a test environment in their own data center that reflects the thing that they want to test. And then basically all we need from them is a single machine to act as the Jenkins slave for their environment, on which we can run any of the testing. So if we've got a whole bunch of machines behind their DMZ or whatever, and they're one sort of magical gateway machine, then when we get our inputs, when we get our commits to the Openstack project, we send that to the scripts that are running on that machine, and then whatever magical tests they need to run to make themselves happy that the software runs on the thing that they care about it running on, they run. If they want to be irresponsible and just run a test that says, echo true, that they can do that. It's probably not going to be proving to them very much that it works on their hardware, and then when people try and run things on their hardware and it doesn't work, they're going to be unhappy. So they'll run whatever they need to do to do that, and that way they can manage the actual infrastructure in a way that's sensible. They know way more about their hardware than I do. But since we're running it from our Jenkins, we run that test and we report the results back of however many tests we run on their stuff into the centralized place that everybody in OpenStack can see what's going on. So rather than Cisco or Citrix or HP going off and running another Jenkins server somewhere in their infrastructure that their QA team is looking at and none of us know about, and then 2 months later coming in and be like, you broke our hypervisor. We'll be like, well, cool. If we'd known about it the instant it happened, we might have been able to respond to it a little bit better. So that's sort of the focus there, and how we're getting people to contribute in sort of a distributed way there. The next little bit about that is that as we mentioned earlier, we're doing a gated trunk, right? Which means that we're doing a lot of testing before every commit. When we first get a vendor to add a set of testing resources into our system, we can't possibly expect that to go directly into blocking people's trunk commits. There's several factors that come into that. One is how trustworthy is that vendor's testing environment. We don't know if they're even going to be here in 2 days. Like, their machines could all go away. They could have network issues. I need to know how reliable their stuff is. I need to know how reliable they are. If there's issues in their environment and I email them about them, how quickly are they going to respond and deal with those issues? And then finally, how good are the tests actually that, how reliable an indicator of success or failure are the tests that we're running on their things. Once we've figured out if their stuff is good, then we can actually start having discussions about moving some of the tests that we're running on their stuff to blocking commits rather than just reporting post-commit. But because it's all done in the context of our Jenkins infrastructure, then we can, it's then a human choice. We can choose whether we want to block on a Cisco switch issue rather than not physically being able to do that, which is really exciting.
So
1 minute, really?
Yeah.
Our thing says 4 minutes.
So, developers have this expectation that if we block their commit from going into trunk because it fails a test, that they should in some way be able to correct this problem. And of course, this is going to become even more of a challenge in a distributed QA environment where potentially a test running in some lab on the other side of the world on equipment they've never heard of could have an impact on their code. So a couple of the things that we're working on is, one, just getting all of the information back to Jenkins that we can. So on the bare metal testing that we're doing, we're syslogging everything back to the Jenkins host and archiving that as artifacts along with the job. So as much information as we can get to the developers is going to be there. We're looking at using parameterized builders so that you can point a Jenkins job at a code branch that you're working on and run it against it. So you don't have to go through the whole formal code review process to get this job run on your code. You can iteratively test it in that way on hardware that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. And finally, if a job becomes a trunk gating job, we'll ask vendors to provide points of contact so that developers can work with a subject matter expert on that hardware and that configuration to get their change approved. And so basically our focus for the next cycle is to add more trunk gating jobs. At the Openstack Developer Summit, I can't tell you how many people came up to us and said, gate trunk on more things, sometimes forcefully, and to collaborate with vendors on distributed testing. So both, again, at ODS and here at UDS, we've been talking to people about setting up the kind of labs that Monty was talking about. And if we haven't talked to you yet and you're interested in that, come talk to us.
Yes, this is very true. We want to talk to everybody about that. And also, just because I don't know when else I'll mention it, we also have OpenStack t-shirts down here at front. Should anybody, if you want a lovely t-shirt at the end of this whole thing. So, or right now, but you could also get them at the end. They're not going to run away. That's about what we got.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, so my name is Visheshaya. I'm the project technical lead for the OpenStack Compute project. I am going to talk a little bit. Monty and Jay described in detail sort of what we do for testing and what we do for getting stuff merged into trunk. I think it's important to understand how you can work on a highly distributed project that involves 7 different sub-projects right now. What that means is everybody in their individual project is changing code, things are constantly breaking, and the testing is one way to move towards that, but another way that we have to sort of make it easy and fun to work on a highly distributed project like this is to have a way for developers to get in and get all of the code together, get it all running together, all from source, and have an easy way to work on it. So you notice that I use Mac as my front end for my Ubuntu servers. And you might wonder why I use such a crippled variation of Unix, but keep in mind I used to use Windows, so it's a big step up for me. So basically, what I'm going to talk about is this little project that my team's been working on called Devstack. And essentially, it's very simple. It's just a shell script that will grab all of the current versions of all of the source code from all the different OpenStack-related projects and install them into wherever you happen to be working so that you can use them. So just as an example, I'm going to, if I can, you notice I also use the nice brand new Ubuntu monospace font. It's actually a very good font, much better. Yes! So I have, basically all I'm doing here is using a little shell script that will create a Ubuntu VM on my local machine and automatically run the Devstack script. It also does a little bit of fancy stuff like sharing, doing an NFS share so I can get my local installation into the virtual machine. Now meanwhile, while that's running, hopefully it all works correctly, depending on how well the network stays up during this. I'm going to show you what I did earlier this morning was I thought, well, you know, some people have a nice Ubuntu server that they want to use. It's a little bit dangerous to install something like OpenStack on your own system because it's doing a lot of messing with network configuration. It's reconfiguring your interfaces file. It's doing a lot of stuff that may be hard to recover from if you mess something up. So generally what I recommend to people is do it on a spare server that they have or do it in a virtual machine. So not everybody has one of those sitting around. So what I've actually done is I've actually installed and run Devstack on, this is a local version of a demo cloud that we have running inside of Rackspace Cloud Builders. It's called demo.rcb.me. And so this is the Openstack Dashboard, which you can use to launch instances, et cetera, view images. And so what I've actually done is I've taken a Ubuntu 11.10 image, launched it, and then logged in and installed OpenStack using Devstack into that image. At the same time I was doing that, I also launched an Honoric image in AWS, and I ran it, Devstack there. I also launched an Honoric image in cloud servers and ran Devstack there. So I have 3 versions currently up and running, all of which I can log into. And so we have a very tiny image that's was actually, I think, made by Scott Moser. It's a TTY Linux, so it's basically a 20 megabyte install of Linux that we automatically download and register. So I can launch this image. Give it a name. I don't know if you guys can actually even see this at all. Let me.
Which Devstack are you talking to?
This is the one running in AWS. While that one's building, I have another one here that's active. I can go in and check out the console. Vnc Console is a pretty cool little web browser-based Vnc console that you can access your images that are launched in case you happen to not be able to SSH in because you forgot to set a key. And this is the one that I ran earlier. It's been up for 58 minutes. And basically what I have is no matter where I'm running this particular image, I can create VMs, I can test, and I have a running install of OpenStack. So that one's in cloud servers. I have another one over here. Actually, sorry, that one was in, that one's in cloud servers. This is the one in, so basically, I mean, I'm not going to go through and do the same thing on all of them, but the idea here is that we have a running instance in each case. And if we've done things correctly, it looks like we're still loading over there. So I will switch to one of the ones that's up. So this is the one running in cloud servers. The cool thing about this is not just installing from packages and getting a running system, because if that's all that we're doing, then basically you would just do an apt-get install and hopefully get a similar situation. But the idea is here is that this is for developers. So OpenStack is one of the most entertaining projects I've worked on. When I was sitting here just figuring out what I was going to talk about during this 15 minutes, what I generally talk about is how the history of OpenStack, where it came from how rapidly it's gone from having 6 developers to over 100 developers working on it, et cetera. But I really wanted to show, because this is more of a technical crowd, that it's actually really easy to work on. The whole thing's written in Python. All the different projects are using Python, so you can get in there and you can modify things and change things really easily. So basically what this does is it will run all of the, okay, of course, I don't have access to the terminal. So it will run all of the different components. Now, some of these components, for example, Openstack Compute has 4 or 5 different subcomponents that it runs. So you've got Nova Compute, Nova Network, Nova Scheduler, Nova Vnc Console, Nova API. You have Keystone, which is the authentication service, which has 2 components. You have 2 services. You have
travels.
No idea what that is.
Hello.
Okay, switching to this one. So basically what that means is, if you say you have a change that you want to make in the way that the scheduler works, then you can essentially just go into the scheduler screen. You can kill the running process, make your changes, hit up, enter, and rerun it. And you've gotten to the point where you can very rapidly prototype and test new changes. There's no build process, there's no make, there's no having to go throw everything into Jenkins and wait for the output. You can immediately just go in and start doing changes. So the idea is that this gives developers a way to very rapidly kind of prototype new features and work on the code without having to worry too much about the complications of installing everything. Additionally, some of the stuff that we're working on in Devstack is pretty interesting. If I can scroll down to the bottom. So we're actually working on a process that will install Nova, all the components into different servers in LXC, so that you actually have sort of a mini test cluster, so you can start prototyping and testing different installation strategies. We have Stack in a Box, which actually will let you put OpenStack onto a USB stick, plug it into your router, and NFS boot automatically onto a real piece of hardware for testing. And we're working on integrating in Swift and Quantum into the Devstack process. And also, one of the things I'm very excited about is with the newer kernel, with the 3.1 kernel, Linux kernel, you can actually run virtualization inside of virtualization. You can nest. So we could actually be running this inside of a full deploy and still have hardware speed. So you could actually run full images. Right now we're running all in software, so running anything other than a TTY Linux image is pretty darn slow. But we could actually get to the point where we're running sort of test servers with actual hardware support. So essentially, that's all of the stuff that that we have, and there's various ways to set it up so that you can share your local folders, your local directories into your virtual machine if you develop locally and you happen to like to use a GUI for editing. Personally, Vim and Screen is basically all I need for my dev environment, but I know a lot of people like to use more advanced editing tools. The idea behind all of this is just, hey, we're developers, we want to have an easy time working on new code, and we want to be able to do things as quickly and and have as much fun doing them as possible. So that's OpenStack, that's Devstack. I encourage everyone, if you haven't taken a look at the code, if you haven't pulled it down, go to devstack.org, check it out, do an install, start messing around with it, because it's a heck of a lot of fun to work on, and it's moving really, really quickly. We expect a lot of neat and cool things to come in the next 6 months. So that's all I have. Shirts were already mentioned. I was supposed to mention those, so I think we're good. Yeah, anybody have any questions?
So the actual Devstack script will bring up the screens. It automatically does JIT checkouts of everything so that you've actually got editable code that you can then commit at the end.
Correct. Yeah. Obviously, you have to set up your get credentials, et cetera, if you want to actually be committing. But that's, for my version, I actually have a provisioning script in Vagrant, which actually I think might actually be done by now, that will actually share my key into my VM and then set up my screen and all my Vim settings for me so that I can just log in once I got the VM up. This thing runs in about 4 minutes, by the way, in the local install. If you cache, do some apt caching and stuff, you can get it really, really fast. And that's from a base install on Eric. No pre-supplying packages or anything like that. It just comes up, runs everything, installs 4 minutes later. So often what I'll do is I will actually just, every so often, just blow away the whole thing and start it again because it's just 4 minutes. The unit tests themselves take 10, so it's faster than running the unit tests to get your install up.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, next up we have Steve George, the Vice President of Business Development at Canonical.
Interesting. Okay, everyone awake? Post-lunch energy levels high? Yeah? Okay. Your first question might be, what does a VP of Business Development do at Canonical? Well, a bunch of things, but one of the key things that I spend a lot of time thinking about is how can we bring more users to Ubuntu? And I think that basically bringing consumer applications and consumer application developers to Ubuntu is a key thing that we need to do to bring more users to Ubuntu. So I'm excited to be talking to you about this. I think I've got 15 minutes. I'm going to go reasonably fast. Mark discussed yesterday that basically our mission as a community, it's kind of a restatement of our mission, but something we've always said we want to do is basically bring the power of free software to a global audience. We talked a little bit about what that means in terms of multiple different devices, how the world that users live in is changing. I think that bringing consumer software is part of that process because the needs of users are subtly different between the users that we have today, how we may use computers, and then the users that we will bring to Ubuntu in future years. Part of that challenge is how can we bring a wider variety and volume of developers and application developers specifically to Ubuntu so that they can deliver the sorts of user experiences that those users want and need. I think I can illustrate this a little bit in a moment. One of the things that's really interesting about an operating system is that fundamentally it's the prism through which we receive our computer experience. So operating systems are ultimately important because they tell us about the interactions. They form a compelling part of what hangs an operating system together. They provide the environment that all the applications that users love and talk about are actually delivered through. But one of the things that's sort of ironic about this is that operating systems don't change that much. Whether you're kind of RMS or you're kind of the 200 millionth consumer user of Ubuntu. The ultimate pieces in terms of things like interaction, in terms of button bars, Alt and Tab, the way we change, those are all pretty much the same. But what does change is that application needs are...
A fair consideration.
Application needs are increasingly diverse. Okay, he's working on it. So here's my chart illustrating the application diversity needs as we move rapidly towards our consumer users. We have RMS and Linus down on the left-hand side using a large number of text editors. Somewhere in the middle, we have Jono and his music needs. I'm not going to go there. And then at some point in the future, after we've passed our Super Bowl ad, our first Super Bowl ad, which I'm looking forward to, we will have our real general consumer user. So come with me on a slight journey to our 200 millionth consumer user and what sort of applications they will need as they come and start using Ubuntu. Well, the first thing is that the way in which they're going to actually get hold of Ubuntu is going to be very different from the way that many of us got hold of Ubuntu. Our 200 millionth user is likely to have got Ubuntu loaded on a device, perhaps after a friend recommended it, or they were talking about it on Facebook. The way she uses the operating system and her experiences of Ubuntu are likely to be different, or perhaps part of what we all have. Perhaps she really loves the ease of use and the applications that she was shown in the store, but there were key brands that she needed to recognize in order for her to want to use Ubuntu. So perhaps she saw that there was Facebook and YouTube, and the nice guy at the store offered her, a discounted copy of Angry Bird World, which is a new MMO which is sweeping our consumer user audience. So she's got all the most important applications, but what's going to make her keep it and not just load a Windows 11, which has been delayed to 2020. There's no single answer to this question. I mean, this is one of the things that's ironic. There's no one set of consumer software or one set of applications that you can get for, users which will guarantee that you're able to give them the ideal platform, the ideal experience. It turns out that all the user research that we do when we look at why users will come to Ubuntu and what their needs are, that to some degree, every user is unique. They are all snowflakes, and they all need different types of applications and different types of experiences, even though, yes, it's true those experiences fit into a broad set of categories. Increasingly, as you move towards consumer users, digital entertainment is gaming, socializing. These are the important factors that come into play. So what does that mean from a kind of operating system perspective? Well, ultimately what it means is that we can't get there on our own. As we broaden the number of users using Ubuntu, we also need to broaden the number of developers that are creating application software for Ubuntu so that we can meet all the needs of all those individual users, 1 by 1 or 10 by 10 or whatever that number is. So in consumer software, something that we've been doing in Canonical is to take that on, and we have sort of two broad targets. The first of which is we want to try and increase application developers targeting Ubuntu, and you'll hear I repeatedly use this word application developers because that's the layer that's really important in this particular group. And we also want to broaden the range and volume of applications. So what I mean by that is that for all of these users who have these unique experience needs, we need to broaden the applications that are available to them. The needs that a user has in the US are going to be very different to, say, a user in India or a user in France. When we first started doing this, it was about a year ago, and the first thing that we did was to start looking at the problems of how do you attract developers to Ubuntu, and then how do you put the software into the hands of users. As you'd expect, the first thing you do is kind of look at all the challenges that developers face. And these are some of them. I'm not going to run through it. But essentially, the objective is you want to create a virtuous circle which brings more developers to the platform, enables them to put their applications into the hands of users, and then through positive feedback, if it's free software, that tends to be positive usage. If it's commercial, that will tend to be purchases. Through that virtuous circle, you get more application developers attracted to the platform, more applications on the platform, and so forth. So these are some of the questions that kind of developers have, but it fundamentally comes down to two things. How can you remove friction, making it easy to develop? And how can you help me actually distribute my application to users? How can you help me publish that application? On the user side, it's actually also pretty easy. Users are really generally excited about new applications. We see this with app stores. They actually love exploring and finding applications that are out there. That's a part of the experience that people expect. So the key items for us on the application side with the users is really to help them explore and find those apps which are great apps for them, and then install and use those apps and give that positive feedback through to developers. Clearly, we have all the base technology, but the question for us was how can we actually bring that into focus? How can we connect that pipeline from developers through to users? So for an Eric, the key item that we want to achieve was really just to connect the core pieces of that platform and to basically work across each portion of it. So developing, publishing, exploring, and installing. On the developer side, we put out developer.ubuntu.com. One of the pieces of feedback that we got was not that it was impossible to develop for Linux, but generally that it was confusing. Where do I start? And the problem for Linux as a platform, and Ubuntu specifically, is that choice is an underlying strength of the platform. There's a range of different ways of doing everything. But if you're a new developer on the platform, that turns out to be a weakness because you just don't know where to start. So developer.ubuntu.com is aimed to provide that getting started place. There may not be one way to do it, but there can be one way that we can start you doing it, and then you can make choices from there. We also hope that this site will form a community, that this will be, for developers, for application developers, this will be the focal point where they'll come together and talk and support each other as they're developing applications. We also launched the My Apps portal. This is the answer to how do we make publishing easy. The App Store model sort of lifted the expectation for developers on what they believe is the easiest way to get their applications published. So with this system, what we do here is enable either a commercial or a free software application to come into Ubuntu by being packaged and reviewed and then pushed out to end users. On the free software side, we do it with the application review board, the ARB. So ARB actually does the reviewing of applications on that side. And then the last thing we did on the developer side was launch the Ubuntu Application Developer Program. We want free software and commercial developers, so we needed to kind of come up with an appropriate program for people who are used to professional developer programs. It's available to everyone, whether it's an individual or it's a company. Simple sign-up process. You can publish OSS or completely free software applications and proprietary apps. And then on the commercial side, our minimum price is $2.99 because banking is pretty expensive globally, so we weren't able to get the price any lower. On the user side, you might recall this is what a few releases ago, this is what the application installer actually looked like. And thanks to MPT and the rest of the team, this is the new interface that we got. And as a bonus feature, we got some great one-conf work from Didier Roche, which is really groundbreaking stuff and stuff that I think lots of people can build great stuff on. This is actually all the people involved with Software Center and the application work that we're doing. What's really interesting about this is that it's both community and Canonical. It's a really good example of how the two are able to work together. Everybody down that left-hand column is a contributor, is a community contributor. So just on my half, I have to say thanks very much. I know some of those people are here at UDS, and they've done some fantastic work. So, the future. How do we make this little guy rock in the next release? As you'd expect, the biggest thing is that we want everybody here to be involved. This really is an area, this is a place where everyone can contribute. You can contribute as an Ubuntu contributor on code, you can contribute as an application developer, and even users can contribute, because creating the energy around applications and bringing them to Ubuntu is something that everyone can get involved with. We got a new lead for this time. We've actually got a track at UDS on consumer apps. So David Pitkin, who's around here somewhere, he's down at the front. We actually have a track. It's the first time we've done an application track this time. So please come along to that. One of the things that we're doing is that at 4 p.m. today, we'll have a consumer app track roundtable. So if you're interested in this space, then please come along. We're going to discuss some of the deeper elements. And we've got a full program of work this time, both on the developer side and on the user side. As it's an LTS, you'd expect that we can't do as much in terms of the user experience this time around. So we're going to focus more on kind of back-end stuff and just general polish and stability. But on the developer side, we can continue to really push hard. And so one of the things we're hoping to deliver this time will be automatic packaging through James Westby and Jono. And what this will do is enable commercial and free software developers in an ideal future just to have their package, and then it'll automatically package up for them and upload it into the Software Center. Clearly, as a VP, I expect that just to be the one time, and we'll all be done after this, but I'm sure John and those guys will think it might take a little bit more work than one cycle. 1 minute. So I said everyone can take part, and what I mean by that is that one of the things that's really interesting about this is that we have lots of things, lots of places where people can get involved. So as an Ubuntu contributor, of course, there's lots of areas like the Ubuntu Software Center and building cool things on top of OneConf. But as an application developer, we're also looking for input into this program. What makes it difficult for you to write applications on Ubuntu? What tools and capabilities should we be delivering to make it an easy platform to target? And for users, we want people to actually, write ratings and reviews for the apps, actually advocate great software, tell us more about the sorts of places and sorts of apps that you really care about. So we're going to be at the UDS track all week. I hope to talk to many of you. I've put the sessions in here as a Google link, and if you want more information, then have a check it out at developer.ubuntu.com. That's it. On the nose. Nick.
Hello? Sorry, somebody saw me. Okay, next up we're going to have Miko Terho from, did I say that right? From Nokia, and he's going to talk about the Qt ecosystem. So give him a round of applause. Just going to mic him up real quick.
Yeah, okay, I'm Oho. Let's see how. No, I can click mine. Yeah. 1, 2. Is it now okay from your view? So sound good, everybody good. Thank you. I'm very glad that I can speak here in Orlando in, I would say, ad hoc, random fashion on behalf of Nokia and Qt, and I'm of course glad that Qt4 libraries are always included in Ubuntu, so you have done a great work. And also what I have experienced, I have worked in 5 years in open source in prior with Symbian, so that always when I take a development workstation, in my case it's usually Ubuntu, and I'm very confused that why Ubuntu and Kubuntu are different. I still do not know the reason, but maybe I'm just a simple man. And how does this page down? Yeah. Space down is a little bit different than written in PowerPoint. So basically my message is that Qt in its current form is fairly important to Nokia, and we plan to keep it as it is, that it is this type of open source Qt project. We plan to pay salaries for those people who are in here, and whatever their relationship to other open source projects is decided by themselves, not by me. So that's about what this slide has to say. And then I think that also we have had some success in the home media ecosystem, where the core reason is that probably the Qt will go to this type of ultra-low hardware platforms, even lower or less package count than Ubuntu itself, nor do I know what is the smallest possible Ubuntu. And then what we are doing, I would say, new ecosystem for the next billion, as in our strategy. It is not completely ready, but we are hard working on it. and we are very glad of all other ecosystems, i.e. Ubuntu desktop supporting Qt and whatever new device form factors the community comes up, and we plan to keep our support as it is or improve it. And these are my next slides. So that the Qt project has been announced so that it is now run as any other, I would say, upstream project in the internet. I have the contact names at the end. And then I think that these type of goals are that it's fair, transparent, inclusive, and meritocratic, pretty similar than the Ubuntu project goals. And then the benefits for, I would say, everybody are better releases, increased visibility. You can tune the Qt to be what you like, more job opportunities, and increased stability in the code. Same goals as you have as far as I understand. And then the only difference what we now have is that Lars Knoll will be the chief maintainer, and when that the Qt itself is so large bucket of code, we have decided that it's a 3-layer meritocracy, so maintainers, approvers, contributors. I think that Tiago Maciera will be the maintainer for the core. And then after we opened this in few months, I think that we got 270 new accounts, 53 external contributions, and we took to the main trunk already 33 of these new submissions, where I think the most significant was this QPA frame buffer support if you want to do these ultra-low devices. And then in our current offering, we have Qt Quick 1.1, performance improvements, new HTML5 features, and easier porting to new platforms. This easier porting to new platforms means that there is a new abstraction layer called QPA, and the QPA kind of abstracts the Windows system away from the rest of the Qt. And when you are using QPA, the code line numbers, they drop drastically. Now our product will just go smaller and smaller, and these have been really drastic for the new abstraction, these cut downs of the code line. Then I talk the rest of the talk about the Qt5. I have some few minutes left. And then kind of this type of, I would say, point release of Qt has happened about every 5 or 4 years. And year 2012, so the next year will be a point release year for the Qt, and this is a little bit the reason that I came to share here with you the news. And what has changed is that these tablet and phone user interfaces have come. Developer momentum is in mobile devices, and we have to make Qt fit for the coming years. And probably also that Qt became this type of bloated beast that has to be put into PCs. And our vision is to add a new way to create applications, which I have heard that you are also using for your 2D experiences, tablet and phone, to do them with this QML-centric application development. But we still retain the full power of native code or the code openness, and via this you can do a large set of devices. I didn't plan to have this slide at all because I myself thought it's not significant, but I threw it in at the last minute. That is the reason that I was late, is that basically I have been just telling to everybody that write QML, because where we know that we can maintain this type of compatibility over all platforms. But when I have heard the feedback from many of the developers, they say that Qt itself is good for the reason that you can also mix and match QML and C++. And this will always be true on the platform, that if you are good enough developer, you can probably do whatever you want with the platform, and all the source code is available. Then kind of our goals for Qt5, that we want to work with the whole ecosystem. I'm here. We have to have a facility to produce state-of-the-art user interfaces. It has to be modular, small footprint, and Qt 4x compatibility, or some type of backward compatibility. Then, like, what will be the planned content of Qt 5.0? Our plan is to have Qt Quick 2 with 10 major new features, all new graphics stack, and then all platforms use this QPA and share more code. New structure, I think, means this, that the linking and building is a little bit different and it's modularized. But I'm pretty sure that those in the Ubuntu community who follow the trunk of the Qt, they are pretty aware what's going on, and all the bits are open in the trunk. There is no hidden library nowhere in Nokia. It's all out there. Just put it in and be happy. And here is a little bit on the structure, that the new structure is this type of that there is platforms, and on top of the platform there is this QPA abstraction, and then Linux Wayland is a platform, Linux X11 is a platform, Windows is a platform, Mac OS is a platform. Your platform is something you do by yourself. And I believe that the upcoming Ubuntu products, they are either this Linux Wayland platform or then this Linux X11 platform, that what you are talking about is included in there. And your contributions as well as our contributions are appreciated. Then essentials are the parts that should be in all platforms. That's a little bit less than now. And then there can be this type of Qt add-ons, i.e. packages or libraries that are somehow close to Qt, but they don't have to be on all platforms. Then the tools that we are talking about, that's the Qt creator set, where our objective is that it's an IDE where you can do everything for all these fast. And I must say that we will always retain that you can use the command line and whatever you want, but at least I'm such an not so good coder, so I prefer to use the Qt creator on my Ubuntu desktop, and I'm all happy about that. And then the new structure is also includes this, that some of the kind of the, I would say, sensors and that type of stuff, they are a little bit modified so that they look a little bit different than in Qt Mobility currently. The essentials are foundation, these type of base classes, WebKit, multimedia, location and maps, add-on modules we know are widgets, then the old Qt4 and mobility modules, 3D and graphical effects. But you, yes, 1 minute. Okay, I'll do it in 1 minute. No problem. This is one of the last slides. And then the graphics stack now has extraordinary performance on this type of OpenGL ES accelerator, so it's 5 times faster than anything we have seen before. And these are the platforms, and we also now got, when the project was open, this DirectFB backend. Big kudos for those who did that. And we have then community ports of Android and iOS being worked on. And then I think that here we have to have more discussion with Ubuntu that our milestone plan is that feature freeze early 2012 and the actual product launch is done during first half of 2012. That's a little bit too late for your long-term release, but I do not know how it will go. And when I am not in charge, but in the open source community, the persons who are in charge, they are namely Lars Noll and Thiago. They are not here today, but I have some Qt staff. I didn't get the names, but I have at least 4 other guys here if you want to chat. Are you in the audience? Yeah, our people are on the back, so yeah, so there is a group of persons who can answer to you, and I thank you on my behalf that I was able to share the platform on this UDS. Thank you.